Hello and welcome to DES104 Photoshop. This week we're going to learn about the basic tools in Photoshop. We're going to learn about how to navigate around the workspace in Photoshop, and we're going to have a really good time making a basic Photoshop project. We'll also cover selections and the different things that you can do with selections and how to bring photo elements into your Photoshop project. Now, it's very possible that some of you might be a little worried. Maybe this is your first time with your laptop computer. Maybe this is your first time using Photoshop. Don't worry at all. Don't stress out about thinking that you need to come into this class already knowing how to use this software and how to use your laptop. This course is designed for students who have never used Photoshop before and students who don't have any computer experience at all. We're going to take you step by step through how to use the program, how to get familiar with your laptop. We're going to show you how to make your first Photoshop project and show you the tools that you'll need in order to be successful in this course. Now, Photoshop's a lot like learning a musical instrument or learning a new skill or playing a sport. In these next 4 weeks, we'll be able to teach you the basics of Photoshop and how to use the basic tools, but you're going to need to go out on your own and practice outside of class, and also go on the internet, do some searching, and definitely make use of your instructors after this class is over in order to really master all of these skills. But don't worry, we will cover a lot in this next 4 weeks, and don't let that intimidate you, okay? Again, this course is designed for beginners. This should be a very fun course. The projects that you're gonna make are gonna be really, really fun. And you're gonna quickly find that Photoshop is not as scary and intimidating as you might think. And remember, your instructor is always here to help you. So if you need anything at all, if you're stuck on anything, definitely take advantage of emailing, texting, calling your instructor. We also have a Student Success Center, which is a great place to go to for help. A good strategy for success in this class is watching your weekly class lectures. Those are hosted by your instructor. They're live, so you can ask questions one-on-one with your instructor. You can watch your instructor do the demonstrations live, and your instructor will take you step by step through how to do each of your assignments during the week. Another really important tip, take notes on paper with a pen or a pencil. Studies have shown when you actually physically handwrite your notes, the information goes in your brain and stays in there longer than if you are typing up your notes. And certainly, if you don't take notes at all, you're not going to remember the information. A lot of the things that we do in Photoshop are kind of like a recipe. It's kind of like cooking. We're going to give you a big old long list of steps that you will have to complete. You'll learn some shortcut keys, and as you're following along and watching the demonstration, write out step by step what I do and what your instructor does. And I'll periodically point out some shortcut keys that you'll definitely want to write down, so write those down as well. Those are really important. And then, again, at any point in the course, if you have questions, email your instructor immediately with those questions so your instructor can assist you as soon as possible. And remember, your assignments for this class are due Saturday at midnight, and that's Mountain Time. That's a hard deadline. So especially when it gets to week 4, at Saturday, midnight Mountain Time, when week 4 rolls around, that is the end of the class. So definitely get in the habit of turning all of your assignments in by midnight Saturday so that you can not only get a good grade, but be ready for week 4 when that deadline is really, really important. So Photoshop installation. Some of you will be required to take a pre-learning assessment prior to getting access to Photoshop. Definitely talk to your instructor, talk to your FPA about that. The access to the pre-learning assessment is in the IUGA community. So navigate to the IUGA community if you're a graphic arts student and follow the instructions in there to download and install the Adobe Creative Suite of programs, which includes Photoshop. If you have any questions about any of this or get stuck, definitely email Sean Childers Gray at independence.edu, and also email your FPA, your faculty program advisor, or your dean for assistance with this. So now we have Photoshop. We are ready to begin understanding how this works and even making our first project. And I know it might be a little bit scary the first time you open up Photoshop because there's all of these different tools, there's all these different buttons. You may be wondering what each and every button and tool means. I would want to just strongly encourage you not to get overwhelmed, and also understand in the next 4 weeks, you're not going to learn every single thing about Photoshop. You're going to learn the basics. And I like to compare Photoshop to learning how to play like a musical instrument, like the piano, for instance. If you spend 4 weeks of taking lessons, you're not going to learn how to play every piece of music that has ever been written. But you might learn the basics, and then you might be able to then use those basics to practice and then let your skills grow as you practice on your own. So we're not going to cover everything there is to know about Photoshop. So don't feel like you have to know everything, but we'll cover the basics so that you can make your first projects, you can do your first retouching, you can have a little bit of fun, navigating around the software and experimenting. And then you'll be able to start, pushing your boundaries as you get more and more comfortable with it and seeing where you can go. So this is what Photoshop looks like when you first open it. And let's take a look around at these different panels that you're seeing. This panel here on this side of your screen, this is the tool panel. And sometimes you might see your tool panel looking long and skinny like that. Sometimes you might see your tool panel looking a little bit more condensed like that. The really fantastic thing about Photoshop and all the Adobe Suite programs is that you can manipulate your workspace to whatever feels best for you. So if you personally like your tools looking like that, then by all means hit those 2 little chevrons on the top of your panel and let them be tall and skinny like that. If you prefer your tools a little bit more condensed like that, then leave them that way. And I like to kind of float my panels around, and I like to have my layers panel kind of floating over here. But if you are a little bit more structured and you like things to go in their space, you can just bring each individual panel over to the sides, and you can see it kind of snaps into place, which is pretty handy. So the main 2 panels that we are going to use a lot in week 1 are your tool panel and your layers panel. So make sure these 2 panels are showing up in your workspace. Sometimes what might happen, and this is something that happens periodically, is you might accidentally hit one of these X's and oh no, your panel is gone forever. What are you going to do? How are you going to get your panel back? Well, if you go up to the top of the screen to this little button up here that says Window, click on it, and then you can scroll down to the panel that you accidentally got rid of. And in this case, we want our layers panel, which is F7. And that's the shortcut key to bring back the layers panel. If you wanted to write that down or memorize it, is F7, and not the letter F and then the number 7, but the function 7 key, which is the topmost key on your keyboard that's like right in the center of your keyboard, F7. And then to bring back the tools, you'll go to Window, and then you'll go to Tools, which is at the very bottom. Now, the handy thing about all of your Photoshop tools and your Photoshop, working in Photoshop and all of that is there's usually 2 or 3 different ways to access something. So I'm going to give you the shortcut keys because when you're using the shortcut keys and when you're making a project, you can work so efficiently if you've remembered the shortcut keys, and you can just, Command S, Command C, and it's super easy. But, you might forget the shortcut keys, and you need a little refresher. The handy thing is on all of these little drop-down menus here, for instance, File, New. If you forgot the shortcut key to making a new document, you can go up to File, New, and as you can see, there's the shortcut key right there. So the shortcut key to make a new document in Photoshop is Command N, or if you're on a PC, it's Control N. But if you have forgotten that shortcut key, you can just go up to File, New. Now, this is where we make our first document. And I understand that this window might be slightly scary because, there's pixels, there's document types, there's RGB. What does all of that mean? Well, this section here, the width and the height, this is how big your document's going to be. And we can choose to make our document in inches. This is really handy if we're making something for print, and let's say we know an advertisement needs to be 8 inches by 10 inches. We can just select inches right there. If we are making something for the web, let's say a website background or a web banner, we might have the exact pixel dimensions provided. And in that case, we might need to make our document, 1020, 24 by 768, if that's the size that you've been given. Now, the next thing down here is the resolution. And I'm just going to go back to inches so that we can make sense of what this resolution is and what this means. Now, if you're making something for the screen, maybe it's a motion graphic that's meant to be on a video, or maybe it's a graphic that's meant for a website, you're going to want to use 72 resolution because this is the ideal resolution for the screen. If you're making something that's meant to be printed out, you want the resolution to be higher so that it prints out and all of those pixels are small and close together. And so you'll use 300 resolution if you are making something for print, and 72 resolution if you're making something for the screen, okay? And what resolution means is how many pixels are fitting into an inch of your document. And so obviously 72 pixels per inch, that means there's not as many pixels inside that inch. So it's going to, so you might even see those individual squares of color. And if it's 300, that means those individual squares of color are going to be much smaller. And, when you'll have to zoom in quite a bit until you see those individual pixel squares. Now, the next thing is color mode. And the two main color modes that you'll be using in this course is RGB and CMYK. Now, what do those mean? I don't want to go too in-depth on this. You will have a whole class on color theory. But RGB is ideal if you are making a document for the screen, because it has to do with how colors are created in the document, like using the different colors of light. And then CMYK is meant for print. During one of our projects, it is very likely that we might have to convert our document to CMYK before you turn it in. And your instructor will advise you on when to do that. But I would recommend that if you are starting a document and you know that that document is going to be made for both screen and print, I would say err on the side of using the RGB color mode, because it gives you access to more adjustment layers and more filters, and you can always convert that RGB document back to CMYK if you need to. But if you choose CMYK from the beginning, then that means you won't have as much access to those extra adjustment layers and filters and blending modes that RGB has. So we're going to start with RGB color, and I just have a general 8-inch by 10-inch document. Resolution is 300, the color mode is RGB, and the background contents are white. That means that my background is going to be plain white. If I wanted to have a different background color, I can select it from this menu. Alrighty, so we have successfully made our first document, and as you can see in the layer panel, there is a background layer here that's all white, and this is our canvas. So if we're, we are artists, so you can kind of imagine your canvas as that thing that you are going to put all of your shapes and imagery and painting and whatever it is we're going to do to this document onto this document. And then you can kind of think of this, your tool panel, as your brushes, your stencils, your color palette, all of those things that we're going to go to make our creation. Now, the layers panel is what makes Photoshop so powerful. Every time we add something new to this document, we're going to put it on a separate layer, so that if we wanted to temporarily hide a part of the document or reorder the document, we can easily move those layers around, hide one layer, overlap a certain layer over another layer. So it's a good idea to, every time you're going to add something, make a new layer first. And so that brings us to one of our first shortcut keys that we're going to learn. And so I want to encourage you to write this down: Shift Command N. Shift Command N. That is the shortcut key, obviously, for making a new layer. And right now we are making just a standard layer that's 100% opacity, meaning you can't see through it, on the normal blending mode. Eventually, as you go on in the program, we're going to learn about different things you can do with blending modes, but for now we're just going to keep our layer on the normal blending mode at 100% opacity, and then click OK. Now, our new layer that came up looks like a kind of a checkerboard, and over here in our layer panel. That checkerboard doesn't mean that we have put a checkerboard onto our document. This checkerboard indicates transparency. Basically, There's nothing on that layer. You can kind of visualize that layer as a transparent sheet of plastic. And that transparent sheet of plastic is ready to have stuff put on it. And so the first thing we're going to put on it is a shape. And the shape that we are going to use is over here in our tool panel in this little button. This button has all of the different shape layers living together. They're all roommates, okay? So you might on your Photoshop see the rectangle tool on this button right below the T here. Or you might see the ellipse tool on that particular button. Don't despair if you are worried that my button is showing something different than yours, because when you click and hold on this particular shape layer button, all of the different roommates are going to show up, and then you can click on each one. So in this case, we're just going to use the ellipse tool really quick. And we're going to draw a simple circle, and that's going to be the first shape that we're going to make in Photoshop. Now, after I've selected this ellipse tool here, I can go up to the top of the screen and see three options: shape, path, and pixels. In just a little bit, I'm going to go in depth into the difference between shape and pixels. But just know, if you want to make a shape that actually is filled in with color and looks like a shape, you'll want to use either the shape option or the pixels option. And I'm going to want to strongly encourage you to use the shape option. In a little bit, I'm going to show you why. Use shape as kind of your default. But for now, I'm just going to draw something really quickly in the pixels option. Now, whatever is my foreground color. So right now my foreground color is this black here. Whatever is your foreground color is what you're going to be drawing with your shape tool. So if I click on this black square here, my color picker pops up. And I can select any color I want by moving two things. This hue slider. So let's say I want to make a blue circle. I'm going to go to the blue hue, and then this whole space here gives me the opportunity to pick what kind of blue I want. So if I want a fully saturated, super bright, bright and saturated blue, I'll go up to this far corner here. If I want a blue that is desaturated, meaning it has more gray in it and very light, I'll go over to this corner. If I want kind of a darkish gray blue, I'll go down here. If I want a saturated dark blue, I'll go down here. So you can choose anything on this color picker that you want, right? So I'm going to go to nice dark saturated blue. And now I'm ready to draw my shape. So you've already learned one shortcut key, which is Shift Command N, and I hope you guys wrote that down. You are about to learn another shortcut key, which you're going to use all the time, and that is Shift. So when I hold down the Shift button and then click on my trackpad and drag at a diagonal angle, I am creating a perfect circle because I'm continuing to hold down the Shift button, and now I'm going to keep holding down the Shift button as I lift up with my trackpad, and now I'm going to let go of my Shift button. And what I did by holding down the Shift button while drawing that circle, I was able to create a perfect circle. I'm going to show you what would happen now if I did not hold the Shift button down. So first thing I'm going to do next is undo this circle I made by going to Command Z or Control Z if you're on a PC. Command Z is the undo. So I wanted to undo that circle I drew. So I hit Command Z. definitely write that down because that's going to be useful for all of your programs. So now I'm going to draw the same circle, but instead of holding down the shift button, I'm going to click and drag at a diagonal angle. You can see what's happening here is I'm making an ellipse, like a proper ellipse, where it's basically a circle that's been squished. And this is great if you are purposely intending to make a squished looking circle. But if you are trying really, really hard to make a perfect circle and you don't hold down the shift button, you can see it's really hard to see exactly where that what a perfect circle is. And then the numbers here are helping a little bit, but it is really hard to make a perfect round circle if you don't hold down the shift button. So the moral of that story is hold down the shift button, click and drag at a diagonal angle, let go of your trackpad, then let go of your shift button, and then ta-da, you have a perfect circle. And that is our first shape that we've drawn in Photoshop, the beginning of our perfect masterpiece. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the difference between vector and raster artwork, and show you how this relates to Photoshop. So we'd already talked a little bit about resolution, and resolution is the idea that you have a bunch of little pixels, a bunch of little squares of color crammed into an inch of your document. So if you have 300 DPI, that means you have 300 little squares of color crammed into an inch of your document. And so it's going to be an image that's nice and smooth, and you're going to have to zoom in really, really close before you start seeing those individual squares of color. And then you also have 72 resolution, where there's going to be less squares that are in that inch of document, so you won't have to zoom in quite as much before you start to see the individual squares of color. Now, raster objects and raster artwork are made out of pixels, individual squares of color. And so anything that's like a photograph, a video, a digital painting that is made with like the paintbrush in Photoshop, or a shape made in pixels mode, is going to be something called a raster object. A vector object is different. Instead of being made with individual squares of color, it's made by a mathematical calculation called a path, and then it fills in that path with color. And the cool thing about a vector design is that you can resize that vector design as much as you want without losing resolution, as long as you maintain the native file format. So let's take a look at actually what that means. So we have made this circle in pixels mode, which means this circle is made out of individual squares of color. So let's say as a designer, you decided that you made your circle too small and you want to stretch it and make it bigger. So you use a shortcut key, and be sure to write this next shortcut key down. Command T, or Control T if you're on a PC. And then anytime you're resizing and you want to maintain the same aspect ratio, hold down the shift button. So I'm continuing to hold down the shift button. Now I'm stretching the circle from the corners like so. Stretching, stretching, stretching. I just want this circle to be huge. I just want this circle to take up a huge part of this document. And now that I have resized this circle about that much, I'm ready to hit enter or return. And now, Here at 33%, it doesn't look that bad. But what happens when we zoom in to 100%? See how that edge looks kind of fuzzy? This is what happens when you resize a raster object. It ends up getting fuzzy. And you might be thinking, oh, what's the big deal? When I viewed it at 33%, it looked fine. But the thing is, your document isn't going to print out at 33%. It's going to print out at 100%. And if you're upscaling in the printer, it's going to be even larger. And you might not see it on your computer, but you will definitely see this ugly, fuzzy, blurry edge when it goes to print. So that's why we have a big important rule in design is do not upscale, do not increase the size of a raster object because it'll get that blurry, pixelated, not very good look to it. So let's go to our next option in our shape tool. Instead of using pixels, we're going to use shape. And what shape gives us is a vector shape. That means that this is a shape that can be easily resized. So we're going to draw it the exact same way that we drew our pixel shape. We're going to hold down the shift button. We're going to click and drag at a diagonal angle. And then we're going to let go of our trackpad. And we're going to let go of our shift button. And already we can see that there are some big differences between our pixel object and our vector object. One is there are these little squares, right, at the tops and the sides of our circle. And there's kind of, if you can see it, a little silvery line here on our circle. And that is the path. So don't worry if you're worried that these little squares and this silvery line is going to print as part of your document. It's not. These are just showing up in Photoshop. Once you save it as a JPEG, once you send it to the printer, these lines and these paths are not going to show up. Now let's say we want to resize this circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command T. I'm going to hold down the Shift button. And I'm going to click on the corner and drag diagonally. As you can see, you might already be able to notice how the edge is not getting that weird fuzzy look anymore. I'm going to just make this a huge circle. Now, after I'm done resizing it, I'm going to hit Enter or Return. And now I'm going to hit Command +sign. And now I'm zoomed in to 200%, and you can see that that edge is not fuzzy and ugly anymore. It's nice and clean and smooth. So an important thing to keep in mind is this is only going to stay vector in the native file format, which is the .psd file. Once you save this as a JPEG, it's going to be converted to raster. But if you're drawing shapes in Photoshop, it's a really good idea to stay in that vector mode to give you the opportunity to continue to resize your shapes. Because as a designer, you want the most flexibility possible. You want to be able to, oh, I'm going to try and duplicate something, make something bigger, send something behind another shape. And you can do all of that if you are in the vector mode because you can resize as much as possible. Now, another thing that the vector mode gives you, which the pixel mode doesn't give you, is all of these other different options. So I can easily change the color of my shape just by clicking on either this fill color up here at the top of the screen, and I can select my color picker, which is this little rainbow square here. I can select any new color that I want. I could also select a new color here in this properties window that popped up. Right, so I can choose any of these color swatches that are already here in my document. I can also, again, go to the color picker, which is this rainbow square here, and I can choose colors from there. And I can also add things like gradients and patterns to my document. I'm going to stick with solid color for now. And another thing that you can do is add a stroke to your shape. And the stroke is this second square here. And it's also, see, it's in two places. It's so nice. It's also up here at the top of the screen, and it says stroke right there. So if I wanted to put, say, a orange dotted outline around my circle, I can select a good orange color here. And you can see now there's just a very, very fine line around my circle, but I want to make that line much thicker. So I'm going to go here to my size option on my stroke, and right now it says 1 point. Watch as I increase the slider here. I can make that orange stroke much thicker. But remember, I wanted to make a dotted line around my circle, and that's what this option provides you. So right now my stroke is set to just a standard boring flat line. I can select the dashed line, or I can select the dots. Pretty fun. I can also adjust how I want this border to align with my shape. So if I go to the little align option here, I can put my dots kind of halfway on the circle and halfway off the circle in the center there. And I can also put my dots on the outside like that. Now these options are also available in this properties window here. So like this little window comes up, and you can access these changes in two places. And I'll just move this properties window over here. I'll move this layers here. You can organize your space however you want. Let's make another shape. And anytime you're gonna bring something new to a document, it's a really good idea to make a new layer. So again, that gives you the option of, if you make something and you actually don't like it after all, you can easily delete it. You can, if you decide that you wanna move something behind another object, you can easily do that. If you want to change the color of just one object instead of another, you can easily do that as well. So remember, the shortcut key to make a new layer is Shift-Command-N or Shift-Control-N if you're on a PC, and then click OK. And now I'm gonna go to a really fun shape tool, which is called the custom shape tool. And it looks like a little amoeba down here. And remember, all of the different shape tools, whether it's the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, or the polygon tool, they're all roommates. So they're all on the same button. And you'll find that that's the case with a number of Photoshop tools, is they're all roommates together. So if you want, for instance, to access the gradient tool, you'll find that the gradient tool is hidden behind the paint bucket tool. They live on the same button together. So I'm gonna go again back to my custom shape tool because this is really fun and you guys are gonna like it. And I'm gonna make sure that I am on the shape mode because that's gonna ensure that I'm drawing with a vector options so I can easily resize my shapes. And then I can choose the color. So I'll stick with something kind of orange, so I can stick with the orange theme. And then if I want to add a stroke, I can do that later. But the really cool thing about the custom shape tool is it gives you access to this custom shape library here, which has so many different shapes. And as you go on in the program, you'll take an advanced Photoshop class and an intermediate Photoshop class where you're going to learn how to make your own custom shapes, and you're going to learn how to download custom shapes from the internet. And you are more than welcome to ask your instructor how to make your own custom shapes and download your own custom shapes. We're not going to spend too much time on that because this is just our first week of classes. But if you are eager to see all of the shapes available, what you can do is go to this little gear icon here next to your custom shape library. That's what this is called. And then you can click on the word all. And what this is going to do is open up all of your custom shape libraries. And you can click on the word append there. And it will open them all up so you'll be able to see all these custom shapes. So let's say we want to use that pretty flower there. We draw it in the exact same way that we drew our circle. I'm going to hold down the shift button to maintain the same height to width aspect ratio. And then I'm going to click and drag at a diagonal angle. Now I'm going to let go of my trackpad. And now I'm going to let go of my shift button. And now I can move this shape into place. So the shortcut key that we are going to use to move our shapes around is the letter V. V as in Victor on your keyboard. And that's another shortcut key that you're going to definitely want to write down, the letter V. The letter V gives you access to the move tool, which is this little arrow here. And it's got these 4 arrows that are kind of intersecting there. That's the move tool. So if you forget that letter V for move, you can go up to the move tool up here in your tool panel. And now I can, check this out, I can move this anywhere I want. And let's say I want to increase the size of this flower. I can go to Command T, another shortcut key that you'll want to write down, Command T. And then I'm going to hold down the shift button, and then I'm going to click on the corner, and then I'm going to click and drag upward at a diagonal angle. And again, hold down the shift button, click at a drag at a diagonal angle. And I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard. Down arrow to budge my shape down, left arrow to budge my shape over, right arrow to make my shape go up a little bit. And I can continue to adjust the size this way as well. So, ta-da, that is how to easily make a custom shape using the custom shape library. Now, let's talk about layers. Let's say I wanted to move this flower behind this circle. I wanted the flower to be in the background, and I wanted the circle to be in front. Layers allow you to do that, and that's why it's so handy to make everything on a new layer. So I'm going to click on shape 1, and I'm going to click and drag it underneath ellipse 1. Now you might be a little bummed because you can't see the flower anymore, but there's 2 different things that we can do to see the flower. We can lower the opacity of this ellipse layer. So I can go over here to opacity, and I really need to make sure that I have ellipse 1 selected. And we know it's selected because this blue is around the layer like that. And now I'm going to go to opacity, and I'm going to lower the opacity. And see, now what is happening is that ellipse is becoming more transparent. So opacity is how opaque a layer is. And as you decrease the opacity, it becomes more transparent. So something that is less opaque is becoming more transparent. So you can see through it. Another thing that I can do is I can shrink down this ellipse independently from the flower. And I can do that by hitting Command T. That brings up my transform controls. Command T. Now I'm going to hold down the shift button, click and drag. Hold down the shift button, click and drag. And now I've made that circle much smaller. And ta-da! That's the magic of layers. Let's see what it looks like if we're going to put the flower on top of the circle now. And that's a different sort of look, isn't it? So layers, we can change the order of things, we can move things independently from each other, and we can also change the opacity of our layers. Next, let's talk about these shape layers and what they can do. So these are all of the different tools in Photoshop that can allow you to make shapes. And the really great thing about these shape layer tools, such as the rectangle, the rounded rectangle, the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, the line tool, and the custom shape tool, is that they are vector shapes. So you can resize them as much as you want. But what's really important is that in order to make absolutely sure that you are making vector shapes is you have to select the shape option from the top of the screen. So I'm going to show you a few more of these shape tools and show you how to draw with them. And each time we're gonna make sure that up at the top of the screen, the shape option is selected. So first step to make my next shape is, of course, make a new layer. So Shift Command N if you're on a Mac, or Shift Control N if you're on a PC. This next shape layer that we're going to play with is something called the polygon tool. The polygon tool. And this is a really fun tool because it allows you to make shapes, of any size, any amount of sides that you want. But it also gives you the option of making stars, which is what a lot of people like to use the polygon tool for. And so this is a slightly more complicated than the custom shape tool and the ellipse tool. So definitely do make sure that you're paying attention. I'm going to, now that I've selected the polygon tool, I'm going to go up to the top of the screen and make sure the shape option is selected. Next, I'm going to go to the fill color, and I'll select a slightly different color. How about just like a little bit of green? And now I'm going to go to, up at the top of my Photoshop, there is this little gear icon here. And this is where you can make your stars. So let's click on this little gear icon. And as you can see, there's some different options. If we just have stars selected by itself, and let's say I'll just throw 8 sides on that star, you can make little stars like that. And that's kind of fun, right? And I'm just holding down the shift button right now so that as I hold down the shift button, all of these stars that I'm making are being made on the same layer. Okay, so if you hold down the shift button while drawing with the polygon tool, all of the stars will be on the same layer. If you don't hold down the shift button while drawing with the star tool, they will all end up on different layers. And the handy thing about being able to put these stars on different layers is that you can then manipulate them independently. So if I hit V for the move tool, I can then, move these individual stars around, and I can, put them wherever I want. I just have to select that layer first. All right, and I can also edit them independently. Now, let's say I want to delete all of these stars at once. What I can do is hold down the shift button, select all of those layers, and then hit the delete button on my keyboard. Now, I'm going to show you a different kind of star that a lot of students like. I'm going to go back to my polygon lasso tool, or my polygon shape tool, and go to that little gear option again. I'm going to make a starburst, which is going to look really, really cool. So this time I'm going to indent my sides by 99%. And I'm just going to throw a lot of sides on this star. I'll throw in 66 sides on my star. Sure. Now watch this. I'll start with the center of this flower here, and I'll drag it outward. And see, right now it looks all silver because the lines are so tiny. But if I make a new layer so that I'm no longer on this layer, you can see have this kind of these this starburst rays of lines coming out from the center. And so this is, you can make some really fun dramatic compositions with these huge starbursts. And I personally like to have these, but I put them like on the background so that they are behind my shapes. So I just have this kind of nice background that's these slight green lines like that. Another really cool thing that you can do with this polygon tool is you can change the quality of the star itself. So let's say I'll go back to like 90%, and then I'll put smooth indents, and then I'll do let's do 13 sides on our star. This is going to have a different sort of look to it. See, these are kind of like little splats. This actually might look kind of cool on the center of this flower, maybe. Something like that. See, that looks kind of nice, right? Another thing that you can do is, let's say, we'll do smooth corners this time. Just put 5 sides. Now watch this. See, now you have these little cartoon, see the soft corners? Give it this like little cartoony, like it makes me think of Hello Kitty or like Lucky Charms or something. These like soft edge stars. And you can see what happens if you indent the sides more. Say we'll do, it's going to have a different quality to it. Those ones are a little bit pointier. And let's say we'll do like 30%. These are like super round, blobby stars. So now you know all these really cool things that you can do with stars and the polygon tool. So have fun with them. Another tool that is handy is the rounded rectangle tool. And it's very, it is what it says it is. It allows you to make a rectangle that has rounded edges. I'm gonna go to my fill and I'll select something that's kind of a, how about super, super light green. And the radius, as you change that, that's going to affect the quality of your rectangle. So see right now, my radius is 100, right? And that's what my rectangle is going to look like. You can see how round the edges are. Let's say if I were to make the radius 300. See how now the edges are even rounder? And how about this? I'll put a 100 radius inside of a 300 radius. Make a nice little frame that way. But you can see the difference now between the, when you have a 100 radius versus a 300. It changes the quality of the edges. Okay. I actually think this rounded rectangle would look good if it's slightly behind everything, right? And then we can put like do a super low opacity and just have kind of a faint little border like so. And I'm just holding down the shift button after I hit the Command T just to kind of place this. That kind of looks like a nice design. Now the standard rectangle tool is exactly what it says it is. It's a standard rectangle and it's going to look like this. If you want to make your standard rectangle perfectly square, then hold down the shift button as you draw it and it will make a perfect square. I'm just going to hit delete. Yes. Delete. There we go. Next, and finally, of our shape tools is the line tool. And the line tool can do exactly what it says it can, makes a straight line, and up here is where you can change the weight of your line. So let's say I'll do a line that is 50 pixels. So it's going to look like that. If you hold down the shift button, it will ensure that your line is perfectly horizontal. And if you're drawing vertically and hold down the shift button, it will ensure that your line is perfectly vertical. And if you're drawing somewhat diagonally while holding down the shift button, it will ensure that your line is perfectly diagonal. If you do not hold down the shift button, then you have to kind of guess at where perfectly horizontal is, and you might not end up making something that is perfectly horizontal. And the same with vertical. If you don't hold down the shift button, you might end up making something like that. Right? So, so holding down the shift button is really, really helpful. But something that these lines also allow you to do is make arrows. So if you're making a presentation or a tutorial of some sort and you want to make a little arrow that points to something that you want to have people look at, you can go to this little gear option here and you can add arrowheads and you can adjust the settings as well. So let's say I'll put an arrow head on the start of my line. See, that's what that looks like. If I were to change these settings, so let's say I'm going to make the width of my arrowhead 1,000, and then I'll add 50% concavity. What will that look like? And see, now my arrowhead has a different sort of feeling to it. I'm getting a little overwhelmed by all the arrows. Let's see. So here's our arrowhead. That's at 50% concavity. Let's do an arrowhead that is at 90% concavity. Oh, it doesn't let us go that high. So, you know, if you get a little error message like that that says, oh, it doesn't let you go that high, don't worry about it. Let's then, you know, try some others and go, okay, I'm going to make it 20% instead. You can also play a little bit with the length. So maybe I'll do 500%. And what will that look like? So you can make any type of arrow that you want. You can change those settings to get just the right quality of your arrow. And you can even, you know, also have an arrowhead on the end so it points the other direction. So if you want to have something point that way, you can. If you want to have something point that way, you can. You can even make little trees with it if you wanted. Alrighty, the line tool, which brings us to some things that you can then do with these shapes that can make them your own. And that is in our layer styles. So layer styles come up when you double click on the blue blank area of your layers. So see here where it's blue next to where it says shape 1. You don't want to click on shape 1. You don't want to click on here, but you want to click on this blank blue area. And you double click, click, click. That brings up the layer styles menu. And what this does is it allows you to manipulate the appearance of your shape. So what you'll do is you'll double click on bevel and emboss, for instance. And make sure that you double click on it, because if you don't, these properties won't come up. Bevel and emboss allows you to make your shape look more three-dimensional, and it gives you a little preview here. And you can also click the preview button here, and as you see, as I increase the depth, increase the size, soften, it changes, right? Changes the quality of that shape. Now, other things that you can do, and you could put multiple effects on one shape. For instance, I can go to the gradient tool, and I can go to select any gradient I want. How about purple to orange? And I can change the blending modes and the opacity, so it looks like a different, however I want it to look. I can change the scale, play around with these settings. I can also add an additional stroke here. I could add an inner glow, which is going to make it have a little glow on the inside. Play around with those layer styles, and you can apply them to any layer that you want just by double clicking on the blank blue area next to the layer, and you can get some really dynamic and interesting effects that way. Alrighty, let's talk about now saving your work. There's likely going to be 2 files that your instructor will request of you when it comes to submitting. And your instructor might request a native file format. That's the .psd file. That's the file that has access to all of your layers, and it's the type of file that can be easily edited. The JPEG is the most common image format, and a very common format that your clients out in the real world will request to see, because JPEGs can be seen by anyone. PSD files, or native file formats, can only be seen by people who have Photoshop. JPEGs can be viewed by anyone. So the first thing you want to do before you save your JPEG is save that native file format. And it's really important that you back up your native file format. because if you don't have, if for whatever reason you don't have that .psd file anymore, and you only have a JPEG, you won't be able to edit that JPEG. You won't be able to rearrange the layers. You won't be able to resize things. You won't be able to do any of this stuff because you won't have the layers anymore. So save your native file format, back it up, and let's learn now how to do that. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and together we're going to make a folder on our desktop for all of our DES104 class assignments. And when you get this menu here that allows you to save your files, look at the very bottom and you'll see here there's a new folder option. So I can make a new folder, and I'll call this new folder DES104 Schoolwork. And I'm going to click Create. And then where it says Save As up here, I'll type in DES104 underscore week 1 underscore, I'll call this demo, but when you're doing your assignments, you'll want to save these as the assignment name, and you'll want to put your name on it as well. But what's really handy is if you put DES104, it ensures that you'll be able to easily find your DES104 assignments from now on. And where we have format down here, right now it's defaulted to Photoshop. That is what we want to use. That's our native file format. And see here where it says layers, we definitely want to make sure layers stays checked because we want to be able to maintain, the ability to manipulate our layers. Now I'm going to hit save. And that is our native file. But your instructor will likely ask for both the native file and the JPEG. So we're going to save the JPEG next. And there's two ways to save a JPEG. You can go to File, Save As, and then select from the Format drop-down menu here, you can select JPEG, and then hit Save. And then you can manipulate the quality of your JPEG here. And here you can see about how large the file size is going to be. So in this case, it's going to be about 373 kilobytes. If we leave it at quality 6, if we increase it to a large file, it's going to be over a megabyte. If we bring it down to 2, it's going to be 200 kilobytes. So you have a limited ability to affect the optimization there in this little slider. Another way to save a JPEG is using the Save for Web options, which will give you more flexibility in optimizing your JPEG. And you can actually get really, really small file sizes that way. So you can go to File, Export, Save for Web. File, Export, Save for Web. And now I'm going to select JPEG medium here. And you can see it has now made my JPEG about 200 kilobytes. JPEG low, 157 kilobytes, right? And it lets you preview the size too. So here you can see there's some banding on my gradient. So I might want JPEG high, and you can see here it's looking a lot smoother. So I'll hit save. And we're going to save our work to our DES104 schoolwork folder by browsing to our desktop. And then I'll just call this optimized so I separate it from my other JPEG that I made. And I'll hit enter or return. Alrighty, so we have successfully saved our native file format and our JPEG, but we've also had the chance to make some different shapes. We've used all of the shape tools that are available to us, which is pretty exciting. We now know how to use the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, the line tool, and the custom shape tool. And we also applied layer styles to them to make them interesting. So you have a number of things that you can experiment with now. But let's talk about downloading images for not just this class, but for all of your classes. See, when you're using images for your schoolwork, I'm sure you're hoping that you can eventually make designs that you can put in your portfolio, but you have to make sure that the images that you use in your designs are images that you have permission to use. Luckily, Google has a really great feature which allows you to browse for images using usage rights. So you can find large, hopefully high quality images that are not copyright protected, where people have specifically stated that it is all right to use them. You don't want to just randomly search on the internet for any image and not use the usage rights search and use it in your document, because those images belong to someone. Someone might have spent a lot of time photographing that thing that you want to use or designing that thing. And if you just use it in your project without getting the correct permission, it doesn't look good for yourself, and it's also really unfair. So please do use only copyright-free images. Let's talk about how to go about searching the right way for copyright-free images. So what we're going to do is go on Google by going to google.com, which I'm sure you guys have been to before. And let's search for something. Now I'm going to go to images. And now I'm going to go to tools, usage rights. And I'm going to click labeled for reuse with modification. Labeled for reuse with modification. And this is now going to filter out all of the images that we don't have permission to use. Next, I'm going to go to size. And when we're working in Photoshop, we want to make sure that we use images that are large and as high resolution as possible. So large is a good place to start, but it's a really good idea to look at what the final sizes are going to be for your document and make sure that you find images that are that size or larger. So if I needed something, say, even larger than the standard large size, you can go to larger than. And 4 megapixels is a pretty good size for general projects that need to be printed. But as you can see, you can search for really, really large high resolution images. Now, as you are hovering over each of these to decide which one you want to use, you'll see some numbers, and that's the size of the image. Okay. Now you might be thinking, oh, cool, that's a nice high resolution image over 3,000 by 2,000 pixels. Let's use it. So you might be tempted to just control click download linked file as, or save image as. The problem is this is a small preview image, and if you save this small preview image, it's going to be too small for your project. So you want to make sure that you click on the image and then click on view image and open up the photo as large as it can go. And see, I can see each of the individual furs on this little guy's face. And that lets me know that it is going to be a good high resolution image to use. So next I'm going to hold down the control button and click on the picture and then click save image as. Save image as. And now I can save it to my desktop or wherever it is I want to save it. I can rename it. Then hit save and I'm ready to use it for my project. Okay. So then how do we bring a photo that we found into our Photoshop project? Using something called Place Embed. Place Embed. So I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to browse on my desktop for that picture, and I'm going to hit Place, and it came in between the polygon and the ellipse, so I want to make sure that I bring it to my topmost layer so that it doesn't get overlapped. So after I brought this in, I am going to hit enter or return. Enter or return to bring the image in. Now I'm going to drag my picture up on top of ellipse 1, right? And I can put this little guy directly in the center of my circle. Just by hitting the letter V. V as in Victor brings up the move tool. And now, with the move tool, I can move it into place. Now you might be really tempted to see this small size image and stretch it to make it bigger. But the thing is, this is the size of the image. If I hit Command T, up at the top of the screen, it shows us the width and the height. This image is already at 100%, so we are not allowed to make it any bigger. That's why it's really, really important to check your image resolution, your document resolution prior to bringing the image in. So if I go to Image, let's do this. I have to enter or return to place that image after I've moved it around. Now I'm going to go up to Image size, and this is the size of our whole document. So see, we are at 2400 by 3000 pixels, right? And our resolution is 300. So we are much higher resolution than that raccoon picture. So next, let's say we want to kind of cut him out of his background a little bit. We're going to use a tool that eventually you'll learn about in week 3, and you'll go more in depth in week 3 with it. But we're going to use something called masking to cut him out of his background. So I'm going to go to this little circle here. It looks kind of like our ellipse shape tool, but it's not, because it's got a little dashed border around it, and that's the marquee tool. And the marquee tool is one of our first selection tools. So I'm going to hold down the shift button, click and drag to make a perfect circle. And now after I've made a little perfect circle around his face, I can go down here to the bottom of the layer panel, to the little square with the circle inside of it, and click on it. See, I have now cut him out of his background. Now there are more advanced ways to cut out someone from their background, but we're going to learn about that in week 3. But for now, you at least have a little taste of how it works. You make a selection around something, and then you click on the Add a Layer Mask icon, which is the square with the circle inside of it at the bottom of the screen. And that then allows you to make this stencil where everything that's black is cut out of that stencil. I hit the letter V, and I can move him into the center there, and I can have a little raccoon face at the center of my flower. So selections, that's what we're going to learn about next. And there are a variety of different selection techniques available in Photoshop. And they allow you to select an area of your picture. And then once you've made a selection, you can colorize it. Like I made a selection here of this circle inside of this flower, and I can then use adjustment layers, or I can paint inside of it, or I can cut something out, or I can copy something after making a selection. So selections are a really, really powerful way to manipulate an image. And there's all sorts of things that you can do with them. So let's go over some different ways to make a selection. Let me now bring in, start with a new document. Give us a chance to remember how to make a new document. So we're going to go to File, New, and let's do something that is 7 inches wide and 5 inches tall and 72 resolution. So now you can see the difference between a 72 resolution and a 300 resolution. Now zoom in. Now we're zoomed in at 300%. So when we bring in a photo, we're probably going to see a little bit of those pixels that we've been talking about. And zooming in this close is really helpful when you're making a selection because you can see, precisely where the edges are. So now I'm going to place, so File, Place Embedded, to place an image on here. And now I'm going to hit Enter or Return. And now we're ready to make some selections. So the easiest selections that there are to make are just your elliptical, your rectangular and your elliptical marquee tools, which are available there at the top of your tool panel. Your elliptical marquee tool makes circles and ovals, just like your elliptical shape tool. And what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift button while I click and drag at a diagonal angle to make a perfect circular selection around that flower. Now, what can I do with this selection? I can color it in. So I can get, say, my brush tool out, I can make a new layer, and I can color, 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 and see how the selection is working. It's not letting me color anything outside of that selection. So it's kind of like, it's really like a stencil. It's like you can only paint in here. Now the handy thing about, being able to color like this is then, what can I do with this big circle of color that I've made? I could put it on a different blending mode, and you are more than welcome to experiment and see what these different blending modes look like. So right now, normal leaves my circle 100% opaque. If I go down to overlay, so overlay applies the color and the shadows to the midtones and also makes things more saturated. Soft light, different sort of look, and you can feel free to go down this list and see what each of these different blending modes do. And color actually colorizes that, okay? Now, but that's just one thing that you can do with your selection. Another thing that you can do is, oh, and by the way, to get rid of that stuff that I painted, all I did was hit delete. I can go to my adjustment layers, which is the circle that's light on one side, dark on the other. And I can go to an adjustment layer called Hue Saturation. And hue saturation is really useful when designing because let's say you've painted something or you've designed something or created something and you want to be able to see what it looks like in different colors. You can then just move the hue saturation slider around and see what your design will look like in different color schemes. It also has this checkbox here to colorize something. And so you can make something monochromatic like this. So after making a selection, you can paint inside of it. You can apply an adjustment layer to it. And you can also use it to duplicate something. So let's say I have this flower selected here, and I want to duplicate what I've selected. I can hit Command J. Command J is a new shortcut key that you guys are going to want to write down, Command J. And I'm going to hit the letter V on my keyboard now. And what that did, Command J duplicated that circle with the flower and put it on a new layer. And so now I can put this, duplicated flower circle anywhere I want on my document. Command J. And I'm going to Command Z and Option Command Z to step back to my selection. And finally, another thing that you can do with your selection is make a mask, which allows you to cut whatever it is that you selected out from its background. And so I can make a mask by going down to the bottom of the layer panel and finding this button that is a square with a circle inside of it. I can click on it. Now, there are things I can continue to do with this circle. I can soften the edges and make it kind of blend into the background a little bit. Let's do that. So if I double click on this black and white shape that has now appeared next to my flower layer, double click. This is called the Masks Properties window. And again, in week 3, you're going to go into a lot of things that you can do with this. But for now, we're just going to play with feathering. And I'm going to increase the feathering. And as you can see, you can now blend your selection that you made. And you can blend your subject into the background like so, using that feathering option, which looks pretty, I think. Okay, so making selections. There are a number of different ways to make selections though. I'm control clicking on my layer mask here, and then I'm hitting delete layer mask to make that go away. So obviously the elliptical marquee tool and the rectangular marquee tool allow us to make selections like this, right? And can feather our edge like so. Control click, delete layer mask to go back. But there are a variety of other selection tools as well. So the lasso tool, your standard lasso tool, is roommates with a number of other tools, including the polygon lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool. The standard lasso tool is, a little bit cumbersome if all you have is your trackpad, because it's, the standard lasso tool is not going to make nice, smooth lines. Right now I'm using my trackpad and my finger's a little unsteady. The standard lasso tool is really handy if you have a Wacom tablet or a Cintiq where you are just drawing with a pen, because then you can just quickly draw in the areas that you want to select. But if you're using a mouse or a trackpad, this is a bit cumbersome. You can see this is what our selection is then going to look like. Not terribly clean, right? The polygon lasso tool is really handy for when you have a shape that is only straight lines. So if you have a box, for instance. So if I were to use the polygon lasso tool for this flower, I'm just, you just go around and you click on these different points and it makes straight lines only. It's not going to be ideal for this flower, let me tell you, but you can at least see how it works. The polygon lasso tool would be great if you had a star or a box or a triangle that you had to cut out. But something organic like this with a lot of detail, polygon lasso tool is not going to be ideal. So this is what my polygon lasso tool selection will look like. Very geometric. Oh, and by the way, Command D is in dog, or Control D if you're on a PC, is the shortcut key for undoing or deleting a selection, deselecting something. Now, another tool that's on the polygon lasso, or that's on the lasso tool button, is the magnetic lasso tool. And I do like to encourage students not to use the magnetic lasso tool because it tends to leave a very jagged, pixelated edge. And unless you're gonna like work really hard to refine it, the end result is not something that's suitable for a professional level graphic design work. On the surface, it seems kind of handy because as you're dragging your finger around the trackpad, you can see that the the magnetic lasso tool kind of snaps to the edges of an object, like so. But the edges will be quite pixelated. And very rough. I had the feathering up at the top of the screen set to 2, so it's going to be slightly blurry, but as you can see, not ideal. And then Command D to deselect. Now, this quick selection tool is fairly handy as it allows you to paint in a selection, but you do want to take care to really refine your edges, and and make sure to go in, and after you've made your selection, probably clean it up a little bit. So the quick selection tool, and before I use the quick selection tool, I want to bring your attention to the 3 options that are available up at the top of the screen. You have your standard, make a new selection option. Then when you're ready to add more to your selection, you can click on the Add to Selection option. And then when you're ready to erase from your selection, you can hit the Subtract from Selection option. So I'm gonna start with a new selection option, and you'll notice that I'm increasing and decreasing the size of my brush. And what I'm using to do that is the bracket keys located next to the letter P on your keyboard. So the left bracket makes your brush smaller, the right bracket makes your brush bigger. So as you can see here, as I'm painting, it's painting in the pink. It's finding the pink flower, and it's painting it in for me. This tends to work very nicely if you have a subject that is definitely a different color from the background. Paint, paint. Paint, paint, paint. Looking good. So let's say I accidentally went a little too far and I accidentally got that leaf in, and I wanted to remove that leaf from the selection. I can go to the little paintbrush with the little minus sign next to it up here. I can paint that out. Or let's say I didn't select enough, so I have that. I can click the paintbrush with the Add to Selection option and paint that back in. And now, just like the magnetic lasso tool, as you can see, there is a little bit of a problem with the jagged edges. I'm not going to spend too much time on, how to make your mask clean, because we're going to spend a lot of time on that in week 3. But if you double click on your layer mask here, and you can, feather the edges, you can make kind of softer edges like this. But we're going to go more into detail on this in week 3. So control click, delete layer mask. Now the next selection tool that we're going to talk about is the magic wand tool. And the magic wand tool allows you to make selections based on color. So let's say I want to select all the pink. I can magic wand tool, and again have the add to selection option here. And this is not ideal, but what this is ideal for actually is when it comes to painting in line art or painting in artwork that is pure, black and white, and you want to just select the little areas that you want to color. This magic wand tool is ideal for that. But for selecting photos, not so much, but for selecting illustrations, definitely very good. Command D to deselect. Now, a slightly more complicated way to make selections is with the pen tool. And the pen tool allows us to first draw a path. And remember, we talked about paths when we were talking about the difference between shapes, shape objects and pixel objects, and vectors and rasters. So the path is what makes a vector shape. So the standard pen tool is something that you will eventually really want to make friends with, because you're going to use it in Illustrator as well. But the way the standard pen tool works is you click on 2 points and it makes a straight line. So there and there, it makes a straight line. When you want to make a curve, you click and hold, don't let go, and drag. And these little these are called handles. These little handles appear and they pull the path, kind of like as if the little circles are magnets, into a curve. So see, pull that path into a curve. So the pen tool is ideal for selecting things that have smooth curves and straight lines. But there is a little bit of a challenge for new Photoshop users the first time they use the pen tool, because it seems a little bit unintuitive that you have to, in order to make a curve, you have to kind of pull these little handles out to make that curve happen. But let me tell you, it is really useful, because you will get, when you practice with it, you'll get really nice, smooth curves. So with the pen tool, on the path mode, make sure you're on the path mode and not the shape mode. With that pen tool, you will end up fully outlining your object with a path, like so. Now you have to turn that path into a selection. So to turn that path into a selection, you'll hit the Make Selection button up at the top of the screen. And then you'll click OK. And there I have a nice selection. Now let's say, for instance, I just want to paint this section in with color. I'm going to make a new layer. Click on the Paint Bucket tool. Select a nice color here. And paint. And now I've painted in that area. But right now my blue is covering up my flower and it's making me sad. And I really just wanted to change the color of the flower. So I can use some blending modes. If you want that color, if it's kind of a mid-tone color and you want it to be kind of darker, you can use multiply. Multiply makes dark opaque and light transparent. You can also try color. Color will actually colorize. Overlay will have a little bit more saturation to it. Hard light. So you can play around with those blending modes and see what they do. And then remember Command D to deselect, delete to delete a layer. Now another option on the pen tool is just the freeform pen tool. And this is really handy, again, if you have a Wacom tablet or a Cintiq and you want to, hand draw an area that you want to make into a selection. Unlike the lasso tool, the freeform pen tool will actually smoothen out what you're drawing with your with either your trackpad or your Cintiq. So again, right now I'm using my trackpad. I'm using the exact same thing that you all have without a Cintiq or a Wacom tablet. But as you can see, what it does is after I've drawn that path with the freeform pen tool, it smoothens it out for me, which is really handy. And then I can turn that path into a selection, like so. All right. And then I can do something with it. So I can use, say, hue saturation to colorize it. All right, and I can move this hue saturation slider around to change this color to something different. Alrighty, so let's take a look at some of the things that can be done when you make selections. After making a selection, you can easily put an adjustment layer on top of that selection, which means that you're going to be applying a color to just that part of the layer. And there's just a lot of different options with adjustment layers. We're going to go more in depth in that in week 2, but feel free, to play around with hue saturation or solid color or gradient or photo filter, especially levels, and see what each of those adjustment layers do after, open up the photo, make a little selection of one part of the photo, then go to the different adjustment layers and see what each of them do, especially when you adjust the settings. You can also, after making a selection, you can copy the thing that you selected. You can do that either by hitting Command J, and what that will do is instantly duplicate that selection and put it on its own layer. You can also hit Command C. Command C is copy, and that's a really important shortcut key that you want to be aware of, because not only does Command C work in Photoshop, but it works in Microsoft Word, it works on the internet, it works on Illustrator. Every software program and computer interface uses Command C. And then what do you do if you want to then paste something that you have copied with Command C? You can hit Command V. So you can copy a selection of your image, Command C to copy, and then Command V to paste that elsewhere. And you can also erase a selection. So you can select something, you can get out your eraser tool, and then you can erase it. And you also use it for masking, which I put a little exclamation point there because I really want to stress how important masking is. Masking is, again, something that we're going to go into in depth on in week 3, but masking allows us to composite multiple images together, and it allows us to create entire new worlds using photographs, which is really fun. And so you guys have that to look forward to. But it allows us to essentially cut something out of one picture and then bring it into another picture and allow us to blend those two images together. So selections. We have talked about so far I would call these the easiest selection tools. These are just some of the many ways to select things. So our marquee tools, our lasso tools, our magic wand tool, and our quick selection tool. And we've also talked about how to make a mask with our pen tool, or how to make a selection with our pen tool. Now, anything that can make a vector shape in Photoshop can be used to make a selection. And so remember us learning about our shape tools? Well, guess what? We can use each of these shape tools to make a selection as well. So let's go to our custom shape tool, since that seems to be the most fun, right? Because we get access to the custom shape library, which has all of these cool shapes here. And let's put a flower on top of a flower. How about that? So I'll get this little flower shape here. And now I'm going to go up to the top of the screen. And remember, we have our three options: our shape, our path, and our pixels. Well, let's select the path option. And what I'm going to do is, again, just like we did the first time we drew a shape, we're going to hold down the shift button. And now we're going to click and drag at a diagonal angle. Let go of my trackpad, let go of my shift button. So I've made a path, just like I did with the pen tool, just like I did with the freeform pen tool. I made a path. So we need to now turn that path into a selection. And to do that, it's really easy. We can click the Make Selection button up at the top of the screen, and then click OK. So let's see the different things that we can do with this selection. We can go to the square with a circle inside of it at the bottom of the layer panel. And I can click on it. And you can see now I have cut that flower out of that flower, right? And then I can continue to use all of the options that are in the masks option, which is that black and white shape here. And I can feather my edges if I want. I can do all of that stuff. I just hit Option Command Z to take a few steps back, so I could now show you some other things that we can do with this selection. As I said, you can paint inside of a selection. Now my photo layer hasn't been rasterized, so anytime I want to paint, and this is a good idea, just what you should do in general when working in Photoshop is never paint on your photo, because then that means your photo is permanently ruined. Always paint on a separate layer. Let's say I want to get my paintbrush tool out now, and I can paint. So I've got some painting on there with my paintbrush tool. Now I can put this paint on different blending modes and see what they do. Right, so I can see what multiply might look like. That looks kind of fancy if I do say so myself. And I can go to overlay, and I can go to soft light, to hard light. So you can get some really interesting effects by making a selection and painting and changing the blending modes like so. Now I'm going to hit Command Z to undo, and then Option or Alt Command Z. And by the way, if you're on a PC, it's Control Z and Alt Control Z to undo. So now I'm back to just my regular selection. And I'm ready to, let's throw on some adjustment layers. So I'm going to go to the circle that's light on one side, dark on the other, at the bottom of my layer panel there. And I'm going to click on good old hue saturation. You can see now what would look like. What would it look like if I, changed the inside part of that flower to something different?
And you can see how cool it looks when I just move this hue slider back and forth. Well, something you guys can look forward to in more advanced courses is making GIF animations. And you can actually animate a GIF so that a certain part of your photo changes color like this, and you can make some really cool effects. And if you're interested in learning more about, different cool effects and animations that you can make in Photoshop, definitely feel free to experiment on your own and also ask your instructor, because your instructor will be more than happy to help you. If you want to really push the program and go above and beyond and make some cool things, you can definitely do that. Take advantage of all there is to learn. So we have made a selection using the custom shape tool. Now let's make a selection using something completely different. We're going to make a selection using a little bit more of a complicated procedure called the quick mask. And this is going to take a few more steps. And if you don't get it this week, don't worry at all. We're going to be covering the quick mask again in week 3. So the quick mask allows you to paint a selection, much like the quick selection tool does, but it allows you to be really, really precise with it because you control everything. So first step is you have to make sure that your foreground and your background colors here are reset to pure black and pure white. And there's a shortcut key to do that. There's a shortcut key for a lot of things. So be sure to write this down. The letter D on your keyboard, not Command D, not Control D, just the letter D by itself. That restores your foreground and background colors to black and white. Next, you'll hit B for brush. That gives you access to your brush tool, obviously. And up at the top of the screen, this is where your brush settings are. And right now my brush is on 0% hardness, meaning my brush has a very soft, fuzzy edge around it. I'm going to increase that hardness all the way up to 100%. And make sure that your flow and opacity settings are on 100% as well. And make sure your blending mode is on normal. Next, hit the letter Q. Q for quick mask. And as you'll see, I started painting, but nothing happened. That's because for whatever reason, my foreground color switched to white. So I need to swap my foreground and background color. So I'm painting with black. I do that by hitting X on my keyboard. So hit X on your keyboard. You want to make sure that black is the foreground color. And now watch, I start painting. And even though black is my foreground color, you'll notice that I'm getting a reddish hue. And that is what I want. This reddish color is letting me know that I am painting a selection. So basically, this is an ideal way to select something that's an organically shaped object, such as this flower. And right now my brush size is really big. I have a really big round circle that I'm painting with. But if I want to get in and do those details and get up in those small edges there, I want to make my brush size smaller. So to do that, I'm going to use the bracket keys. So the bracket keys on my keyboard, left bracket, left bracket, left bracket, left bracket increases, left bracket decreases my brush size. So now I can get in and paint these small areas. By the way, you'll see me do this, Command minus sign to zoom out, Command plus sign to zoom in. So you might want to write that down, those shortcut keys as well. Command plus sign to zoom out, so Command plus sign to zoom in rather, and Command minus sign to zoom out. Now notice how I made a little mistake there as I was painting in my selection. I got a little red in the green. Hit X on your keyboard. X allows you to paint away your mistakes. And if I remember correctly, I had a little mistake down here too. So with the letter X, I'm now painting with my white. and that erases this selection. Where was another little mistake I made? Over here too. A great way to navigate around your document is to hold down the space bar. So write that down too. If you hold down the space bar, I can now move around my document like so. And now as long as white is my foreground color, I can erase that red. I can hit X and I'm painting back with the red again. And this is a kind of thing where you're going to want to spend a lot of time getting in and getting a really precise selection. And I'll show you what it will look like when you're then ready to turn this red transparency into a selection. So let's do it. So remember I hit Q to start painting in this quick mask mode? Well, I'm going to hit Q again. And now I have turned that quick mask into a selection. But we're a little bit in opposite land. See, everything that I painted with red is actually outside of the selection. So I need to invert my selection now. So I need to invert my selection. And to do that, I'm going to hit Shift Command I. Shift Command I, another shortcut key sequence that you're definitely going to want to write down. So now I have just this flower selected. And now I can click, the layer mask icon there. And, I didn't spend very much time making my selection look nice. So it needs a little bit of work, right? So I can also show you the other things that I can do with the selection I made. I can add an adjustment layer and I can put hue saturation on this and I can colorize it that way. Command Z to undo, Option Command Z to go back to my selection. And now let's hit Q again. And see, remember how I inverted it? So that's why everything now outside of the flower is selected. So I can go in now and I can, zoom in and work a little bit harder on getting a nice clean selection. Clean up these little edges here. Hit X on my keyboard and zoom in nice and close and get a nice clean cut on this flower. And by the way, if you are thinking, gosh, this quick selection technique, there's a lot of steps involved and a lot of painting and stuff involved. Well, the cool thing is you don't have to worry about it this week. We have learned a number of different ways to make selections. So if you don't feel like using the quick selection tool this week, you don't have to. Okay. You can use one of the other selection techniques. See, now I'm just going in and I'm just kind of cleaning up those edges, trying to get these petals looking a little bit nicer. And what this is great for, this kind of quick mask, is if you have something furry, it's really useful. It's hard to select something furry with like a little furry bunny or a furry animal. It's hard to select something furry with a pen tool without making it look cut out and fake. But you can use the quick mask tool and you can paint in, get all those little hairs, and we'll talk again more about that in week 3. Let's do a little quick selection of this flower. Now after I've made this mask, ready to turn this into a selection by hitting the letter Q again. Remember, so you hit Q to start painting in quick mask mode. Then you hit Q again to turn that quick mask into a selection. And, this is what I look like if I cut it out. Again, a little bit of work needed around the edges there. And don't accidentally hit the layer, the layer mask icon twice, like I just did. Don't do that. Option Command Z. And let's see what would happen if we were to just change this whole flower to a different color using hue saturation. See, I hit the colorize, and the colorize is really great because it makes the whole thing change color. All right, so I can make that whole flower blue if I wanted, or purple. So we have learned quite a few different techniques for making selections. We have learned the standard marquee tools, rectangle marquee tool, elliptical marquee tool. We have learned the quick selection where you paint in the selection. We've learned the magic wand tool, the lasso tools, so the standard lasso tool, the polygon lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. We have also learned how to make a selection using the pen tool and using the custom shape tool. And we've learned how to make a selection using the quick mask tool, which is where you're painting in the red and then you're turning that red into a selection. Let's go over our main learning objectives. So we learned at least 4 techniques for making selections, definitely more than 4. We've discussed the key differences between raster and vector artwork. So if you remember, the raster artwork is artwork like a photograph or a painting that's made out of little squares of pixels. And so when you try and stretch them and make them bigger, they end up looking blurry and pixelated. Vector artwork, on the other hand, as long as it's saved in the native file format, is always going to be easy to scale, and you're always going to have nice clean edges when you increase and decrease the size of a vector image. And then we learned the different shape layer tools in Photoshop. So we learned how to make shapes using the ellipse tool and the rounded rectangle tool and the standard rectangle tool, and we learned the custom shape tool and the line tool and the polygon tool to make stars. So you guys have a lot of new techniques and tools at your disposal. So get started designing. The best way to learn is just by going into Photoshop and experimenting, but definitely feel free to contact your instructor if you need more one-on-one help. Alrighty, I hope you guys enjoy this week.